Where the dust won't lie, the dust won't lie. Where the dust won't lie, the dust
Pinkie, it's fabulous to meet you. I've seen your work on social media and been a great admirer of it, and to actually get to see your show and meet you in person is brilliant. This is your first single person show. How does it feel to see your work in one place like this?
It feels perfect because the reason I'm making this work is out of a kind of frustration that stained glass isn't seen as a contemporary art form. And this is a centre for contemporary art. So it's it's perfect for my work as far as I'm concerned.
Your work is very contemporary. It touches on a lot of issues that we're dealing with today, entirely away from what most people think of as stained glass. It's so refreshing and so wonderful to see an artist taking stained glass as a chosen medium of expression. How do you find working with glass? Are you able to express yourself well in it?
Well, it's been a strange journey for me because I started making stained glass just as a job, really helping in a studio making, replicas of Victorian windows, repairing windows, and just making designs to the customers' demands. And so I spent many years learning the techniques, and over those years, I got more and more depressed and frustrated by the kind of things I was being asked to make. And I realized that the customers didn't know anything about stained glass and they didn't have any ideas. And yet I was the person being told their designs. And so eventually I started making my own thing as a kind of therapy from that, because I felt really frustrated that even the churches weren't asking for figurative work or painted work. It was all very abstract, and I felt like, well, these skills of painting are disappearing, and this is one of the reasons why it's happening, is because people don't want that explicit kind of imagery in stained glass anymore. And I just felt really sad about that because I loved the medieval glass and all the lively, crazy anarchy of those strange, weird, and wonderful images. And I just thought, I want to take that and make it work for today and be about stuff that's happening to all of us today, and the stuff that really matters to me.
dust won't lie, the dust won't lie, where the dust won't.
It's wonderful to hear that because there are so few artists who are using the medium of stained glass in that way. It's such an expressive medium. You're playing with light and you do it expertly. Looking at your work in detail, it's really lovely because it doesn't come across as complex in a photograph as it does in person. You're doing multi layers. You're doing really exquisite sandblasted work. Technically, it's absolutely first class work. Do you enjoy the craft side of working with glass?
Oh, very much so. I feel like, I've developed these skills kind of by accident, and uh, now I find that because I've got those skills, I can kind of delve into my subconscious, and it leads to all sorts of artistic ideas. So that makes it so exciting for me as well, because the kind of stained glass that I really love, the medieval stuff, has so many different things going on in it, partly because it's been broken and repaired over centuries, and it's got that chaotic element. So I like just sort of taking a bit of, lacy pattern glass and kind of throwing it in next to a face, and you know the random stuff that I can do, I really enjoy. But it's just such a beautiful medium to work in.
We just don't see enough of this beautiful type of work that you're doing, and there are so few artists doing your kind of work. Why do you think it is that serious artists don't get involved more with expressing their vision through glass?
I think it might be a lot of it to do with the galleries, have an absolute ignorance about the medium. They don't know how to exhibit it. They think it's difficult to, and they don't know if people will want to buy a light box, and just a blind spot, perhaps. I'm not sure.
Do you feel perhaps also there's a general perception that glass belongs in a church, that it's an art form, a minor art form of the past rather than a major art form of the present?
Sadly, yes. And actually, another thing that I think is it doesn't come across very well on telly. And I really think, I've noticed that, you have these programs going, looking at these amazing buildings, and there's an incredible stained glass window there, but it just looks like glare because the cameras don't know how to film it. So maybe it's just people are just not seeing it. People are not going to church. They're not seeing it on telly. It's actually quite hard to see stained glass.
Part of your show is also doing live performance. Tell us a little bit about that and why you decided to combine visual arts with sound.
Well, I bizarrely came to stained glass because I was a penniless musician. And I had been working in the music industry and put out 10 albums, and I've toured quite a lot, but I never made enough money to live off it. And so I was always working in dead-end jobs in pubs and cafes. And then my friend started doing stained glass as a hobby, and people were saying, "Oh, would you make me one? Would you make me one?" And I'd like one for my front door. And eventually he had more work than he could cope with, so he asked me to help him. I hated it, found it really difficult, didn't want to do it, thought it was completely uncreative art form, but it paid a lot better than working in a pub. And eventually I got hooked once I started realizing about the painted element. I never gave up music, and it's always been something that I've been doing stained glass part-time and music part-time. And when I had I always knew that if I did a solo exhibition, it would feel weird not to have a sound element at least. And then when I got offered this opportunity at the CCA, I thought I'm going to do a performance element as well, because it's a huge space. And I had this whole idea about doing this installation about a abandoned church and the past and present and future of this space, and relating it to nature reclaiming abandoned sites. And I thought how lovely it would be to perform in that as perhaps a character from that had been in that space, calling out to lost species and just the beauty of the church, using those elements, but in a secular way, and to talk about issues about climate change and the soil.
Blow your wise and your wicked ways.
So you're mentioning Gothic art and you're mentioning religious art. Can I ask, do you have any kind of religious motivation for the work, or is it entirely secular?
I don't at all. My mother was a fervent atheist, she was brought up a Baptist and rejected the religion when she was about 14, but she was always infatuated with sacred music and sang in a choral group, and was often moved to tears by the beauty of this music. And she said it didn't matter what the words were because they were in Latin. She didn't understand them anyway. So I kind of grew up surrounded by the Christian art form that with this incredible power and beauty, but without the religious element. So it kind of feels natural to me to use the power of that stuff to get over a message that I feel is more relevant and universal. Well, that's it. And it makes it fun because you've got people's prejudices or their assumptions about stained glass. So they'll think, oh, stained glass, immediately think it's going to be a saint or a Bible story. And then when they see something like a condom or whatever it is, they're kind of like, oh, hang on a minute, and do a double take. And you've got that wonderful sort of friction, and it makes it funny as well, and it takes people by surprise. And I really enjoy that.
So, what are your inspirations? What wells do you find your sources of inspiration from?
It's pretty random. I mean, really, it's generally just what's on my mind. I'll have read something that upsets me or amuses me. I mean, with this large installation here, it's because I'd read about soil degradation, which sounds like a really dry subject, but it's actually incredibly important to talk about the fact that we're losing the soil on the planet, and without soil, there's no food, and it's actually quite urgent. So that, I was motivated by that. And also, there's one that I did where I'd read a Old Testament Bible story, just a quote from the Old Testament, which talked about an angel telling the birds to descend from the skies to eat the people, and that made me think immediately about these crazy tabloid headlines that you see all the time about seagulls stealing people's chips, and I just thought that would be a great way of talking about environmental stuff as well. Why are these seagulls stealing chips, and what a funny scene that can be, a typical British seaside scene, and with all these people being attacked by seagulls. I couldn't resist it.
So you like the idea of bringing humor into sort of serious topics and mixing it up and having a variety of different symbols at play within one piece of work?
Absolutely, because the one thing I don't want to be is preachy, and there it is going against what people so often will assume about stained glass being sort of dull and preachy and oppressive. And also, when you're trying to talk about really serious subject matter, you can really alienate people, whereas if you just sort of give them a bit of a laugh, maybe they'll go away armed with a bit more information, but actually feeling quite positive about maybe doing something about it.
It's been an absolute pleasure meeting you and talking with you, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the rest of today's events with your performance. So, Pinkie Maclure, thanks so much for joining me.
You're most welcome. Thank you.